Hey, Paul, how are you?
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
Awesome, man. We just very honored you could join us today, man. When you think college football and SEC, you're the goat, man. You're the
Well,
guy.
hey, well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation. I'm glad we could work it out. Let me. Is everything? I'm in a studio that's kind of unlit right now. So is this okay?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, so we'll just get started. I mean, just as these guys are starting their journalism's career, man, just tell us kind of how you got started in the journalism. You know, a lot of people know you from ESPN, but just your backstory a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you. Listen, I went to school at the University of Tennessee and had no intention of ever getting into journalism. I was thinking about being a lawyer. Uh, as I was toward the end of my junior year, saw an ad in the school paper about for a volunteer reporter. I went down, and I'll make a long story short. I had no idea what I was doing. I uncovered some scandal, and they hired me, and I quickly got into sports. Had two offers getting out of college, and took one, the farthest away from where I was, and spent the first half of my career as a reporter, investigative reporter, later a columnist, and then branched into radio. And ultimately, 10 years ago, I got this job.
Yeah, Paul, once again, thank you for joining us. It's such an honor. And as Jason just said, so all of us are wanting to pursue journalism kind of whenever we get older. So what advice would you have for us?
Well, I think there's some basic tenets of journalism, and by the way, not to sound like a professor, but journalism is a big word. What does it really mean? To me, journalism is trying to seek truth, trying to present it fairly and and respectfully, and not being intimidated and influenced. Unfortunately, that's not easy to do anymore. But my advice is always it's fairly basic and simple. Is be curious, be inquisitive. Always, there's always another question. When I got to ESPN, I was doing an interview, and I thought I was prepared, and things changed, and it went long, and I frankly didn't have anything else to ask the guy. And afterwards, one of the executives said, what happened? I said, well, I thought I was done. He said, there's an endless amount of questions for anybody. It never ends, and I think that's correct. So always be curious about things. You have to. You have to be passionate. You probably heard that speech since you were in high school. But I mean, you don't want to. This is not a field to get into just to do it. It's not like just a job. It's something that you really care about, and you have to work with people. It's not always about you. I do a show by myself, but on the weekends I do a show with four other people, and it's like if you're in the entertainment world, you're a singer. If you're in a band, you have to get along, and I think that's really important. A lot of times, people are standalone talents. I mean, I do a show on Saturday morning in football season with Tim Tebow. He's one of the most important college football players of all time. But on that show, in theory, we're all equal. Now, by the way, that's not true. But you have to at least go into it thinking that.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, I think you'd have been an excellent lawyer too. I've heard you argue some great things in the past and
Thank you.
Uncover some scandals. I really like the investigative journalism that you've done. I was alive during the Antonio Langham and all that stuff. So I just appreciate that part of it as well. I appreciate, as OU fans, we heard the Switzer interview with you, and from the Tulsa World when he made the quote about OU joining the SEC. And honestly, some of the stuff I heard him say, I was a little bit shocked about the divorce from the program. That was kind of language I didn't know I would expect from Barry Switzer. I didn't know that part of it. But can you talk about, were you shocked at all by what he said? And maybe do you agree with what he said?
I was surprised. And first of all, you have to love Barry Switzer. He's 82 years old, and he still talks like he's in the dorm at OU. I mean, and he probably still drinks like it too. he's an iconic figure who I think is concerned, and I think he's also hung up on Lincoln Riley. And listen, I'm not on your campus right now. I understand Lincoln Riley was a big deal, but let's not forget Lincoln Riley inherited a great program from Bob Stoops. So, did Lincoln Riley cut and run? Sure, he did. He knew the SEC. He knew it wouldn't be easy. But to me, this has been a move in the workings for a long time. I said something about 6 or 7 years ago. You guys may have been too young to have picked up on it. That at that time, OU was making overtures to get in the SEC. I felt that very strongly, and the sourcing on it was not somebody I ran into at a bar. It was people at the highest level. It didn't happen, but ultimately it did. So I think this has been something in the works for a long time. It just so happened to coincide with the crisis. If Lincoln had not left, I think the school would have been in a lot better shape. You guys know it better than I do what went out the door the day that Lincoln Riley left. Only a Heisman Trophy winner, only a guy who led South Carolina to some pretty big wins as well, and a lot of other players, in addition to a bright coach. I don't think anybody knows yet what the verdict will show on Venables, but ultimately Oklahoma will survive. It's one of the great brands in college sports. And it was interesting to me, though. I was in Dallas on Thursday at an event, and the host of the event was the dean of the University of Texas School of Communication. And just talking to him and others, I did get the impression Texas is a little bit more excited right now. Why? I don't know. Steve Sarkisian really hasn't shown very much, but the only thing the win over OU is pretty much it on his resume. But I think Oklahoma will fit well into the SEC, probably better than Texas in some ways.
Yeah, Paul, as far as the overall landscape of the SEC, how do you think OU and Texas kind of change that?
Well, I think no conference has ever inducted two members like this before. This is a powerful combination. If you look at any list of the top 10 college football brands of all time, OU and Texas are on there, and it's going to be a sea shift. It comes at a time. And I'm so glad it's happening now in 24.
Yeah,
I think everybody was sick of waiting. I wish it had happened earlier. That I think is interesting, because already from the moment that OU and Texas announced to the day they go in, we've already seen a change. Alabama owned the league 2 years ago. Georgia does now. Yeah. So I think they'll fit in well. I think we have a pretty good idea what the schedules are going to look like with the pods versus the divisions. I think that's helpful. I think it's a little bit more interesting for fans. But I think more than anything, it's going to be an easy transition. It was a little tougher when Missouri came in. That was an odd fit. You guys understand that better than I do. But Missouri was not a natural fit to the SEC. I think Oklahoma is. Texas, again, you guys are on the OU campus, but Texas feels like it probably belongs in the NFC. With all of its power and might. But, I think the SEC is pretty excited to have both.
Yeah, Paul, with OU was supposed to play Georgia this fall in Norman, and obviously that's canceled due to the SEC move and the unfairness of it being a non-conference matchup. Do you expect OU to play Georgia next year in the SEC?
I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to make that up pretty quickly. You remember they have the ability to do anything they want with that schedule. Who will OU play? We know they're playing Texas. We know it's possible. The Missouri, Arkansas, A&M. It's going to be some combination of that. So it's just a matter of how they decide to do it. The schedule. They're going, even though they say that they're not, that they're going to try to help OU and Texas out the first year with big games. It's the first year of a new television contract too. And if I had to bet, I bet we see that game quickly.
Yeah, and with Kirby Smart in Georgia, everyone knows how that started year one. Kind of struggled. They went 8-5, and he was a long-time defensive coordinator for Saban, highly successful. And then you look at Brent Venables, defensive coordinator, highly successful under Dabo Sweeney. Do you see any similarities between the two after Venables' tough year one at OU?
I think it's possible. I mean, the first year of any coach is so difficult, and I've had coaches tell me that they don't ever understand the difference between being an assistant and a head coach until they get there. And primarily, it's about time. It's not so much the decisions. I mean, if you're Brent Venables and you made all those defensive calls at OU and at Clemson and national championship games, you know what you're doing. But the difference is you've never had every single decision come to you, and the amount of time that it takes is probably enormous. And most of them overbook. They feel like they owe it to boosters. They feel like they owe it to alumni groups to go out and do everything, and there just simply isn't enough time. Once you get used to it, you realize I don't need to do that. I mean, I don't mean this. I'm just spitballing here, but there's a lot of communities in Oklahoma that want the head coach to come visit them, and it's probably not a great idea for you to, if you're the head coach, to do that at every town the first year. But that happens a lot. It takes a lot of time, and I think. You make mistakes because there's only so much you can do. I don't think you have any idea how demanding it is. And I think he made a lot of mistakes last year.
Yeah.
You hope he can correct it. But the problem is if he doesn't, time becomes very short.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody will put up with losing at OU.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely some game management mistakes. I think that maybe he could rely on Bob Stoops, maybe have some conversations because he's never been a head coach. But I was going to ask you, Paul, about SEC expansion. OU in Texas now, how much more is there going to be, or are they done?
I don't think they're done. And I think some of it depends on what else happens. I still believe the Pac-12 the Big Ten is going to try to poach 2 more Pac-12 schools, maybe Oregon or Washington.
Oregon.
Yeah. That's never done. Part of the reason why you don't want to do it too quickly is what we're going through right now. It takes forever to make this work. And once you get this new schedule in, the idea 3 years down the road to add more schools. And frankly, if you're the SEC, which is a league you guys care about now, who fits? It's not like, look at what the Big 12 did. UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU. None of those schools fit in the SEC. So who does? The only ones. Notre Dame is the biggest, but Notre Dame, if it
Clemson maybe
would go to the Big Ten. So the SEC essentially is looking at Miami, Florida State, Clemson, maybe North Carolina, and right now the ACC is probably hanging on, not doing well, but hanging on.
Are you for the 12-team playoff, or do you think it may lead to maybe more blowouts like we saw in that national championship team with Georgia and TCU?
Yeah, I'm for it, but let me assure you guys, there's no sound reason to be for it. If I was trying to make my argument in a senior debate class in Norman, I would get an F because you can't back it up. But what you do is you may not be able to avoid blowouts, but you do add an element to college football that we've never had before. And think about all the. It's not only the 12 schools that are involved. It's another 8 or 10 that are trying to get in. So you have instead of maybe 6 schools trying to get into the 14 playoff, you may have 20 trying to get in. What makes the NFL work? It's because there's so many things. There's so many different combinations. If you're living in Dallas or you're a Cowboys fan, you may not have the number 1 seed, but what are you playing for on week 16 and 17? You may be playing for either a first round bye, home field. So there's always something at stake, and I think that's what will motivate and electrify college fans as well.
Yeah, how many SEC teams are you expecting every year in that 12?
Well, I think I mean, I think 3 is a good baseline. It could go higher some years. I mean, this year, obviously Alabama, Georgia would have been in. I think Tennessee and LSU possibly.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably would have had 4 the first year if this had been the year. I mean, I just think college football needs a reboot. When you think about it, I mean, yeah, you guys are fans in Oklahoma. I live in the South. But I've also spent a lot of time in New York, and you have to give people in New York and Chicago, LA, the big markets, something more to wrap their arms around than what we have now. And that's the main reason they did it. It's going to be a very valuable, destination point for TV, which dominates the sport.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul. So as we all know, you're very familiar with the SEC. I mean, you've gone everywhere in the SEC. Do you have a favorite environment when it's like tailgating, maybe game day environment that you've got to experience?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds cliche because I have been to all of them quite a few times, I might add. But I think for fans of Oklahoma, you'll find Georgia to be really cool. In terms of, I always get, you always hear people say, I don't want to pick one, but I'm past that point in my life where I'm afraid that I'm going to offend some city. Athens is probably the best. I mean, if you go to the game, to go after the game or the night before the game, I think Athens might be your best destination. It is the quintessential college city. It's small, but it's got everything. It's also easy to get to because it's an hour away from Atlanta. I went to Tennessee, so I do think there are certain elements of Tennessee that are different than any other place. You're at the foot of the mountains. You're on a river. The stadium is right below a big hill, so there's some elements there. Alabama is Alabama. I mean, I did both the. This is long before you guys were around, but 20 years ago, Alabama played a 2-game set with Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Went out to Norman, and then Oklahoma fans came, and and there's just nothing quite like going to the Alabama campus. You see the Bryant Museum, where a lot of history there. So I mean, that's a start. Sometimes it just depends on the game. I mean, I've been to some great venues for bad games, and you can't save the weekend if you go to Arkansas and they're 3-8. Yeah. I know that you hear the cliche, there's no such thing as a bad game. Well, I've been to a lot of bad games. I'll disagree.
Yeah, you mentioned 2 schools that this question's about on Georgia and Alabama. So with the new format, it's looking like every team's going to play everyone every other year. So within 2 years, you're going to play everyone. How excited are you on the Georgia-Bama matchup pretty much every other year?
Yeah, I mean, it's a game we don't see very often. But, we saw, I'm trying to think, I think in COVID, Alabama played Georgia during the regular season, and then there was a 2-game set. But that is a game you rarely see. So, yeah, that could be epic. I mean, there are a lot of games that I think that add. I mean, I remember I went with Alabama to Florida a couple of years ago, and they had not been down there in 10 years. I mean, that's a long time not to play someone. So, yeah, I mean, mostly, everyone knows how the divisional matchups are, and I mean, some of the rivalries are really cool. LSU, Florida, that's a game you hate to lose. Auburn, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. But I mean, raise your hand if you're really sorry to see the Ole Miss Vanderbilt game go off the schedule on a regular basis.
Can't.
I don't see any hands.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, on the Saturday morning, the game day, the SEC Nation, like you talked about being part of a team and all that. And it just looks like, I mean, y'all have a blast together. Just kind of that day, is that just a fun day, or does it feel like a work day? How is that for you?
No, you try to have what you want to do. I spent my first year at ESPN on College Game Day because the SEC network had not launched. So, I mean, I was not an integral part of the show. Don't misunderstand me. I mean, but I travel with them, and I watched them, and there seems to be a chemistry on that show, but off the air, there's not. Let me assure you. Hope everybody quotes me on that. On SEC Nation, there is a camaraderie. Tebow and I have been doing the show since its inception. Laura has been on the show most of the time. Roman and Jordan are more recent, but what I try to do more on that show than any show I've ever been on is to make other people better. Now, if that's the goal of the talent, this is something you guys really ought to think about as you go on with your career. Everyone's always thinking, well, how do I shine? How do I get the big line? Well, you can do that, but if you're part of an ensemble, if you're on Saturday Night Live, or if you're on some other show or a sitcom, you have to make the other person look good. Otherwise, they can make you look really bad. So I try to do that. I often get criticized by my bosses, like, why don't you say more? Well, I'm doing a lot more than maybe you see. But I know Tebow is an iconic figure. When I realize I know his cadences. I mean, he's very excitable. He's passionate. So I can kind of feel out of my peripheral vision if I'm about to say something, but he's coming. Just calm down, because you have to let Tim be Tim. I mean, I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's also it's part of the reality of a show like that. And on the other hand, we have fun together, and I think that's the key, is to make it look like it's fun versus that you're out there being miserable. I've been on shows when everybody was miserable. I've been on shows when nobody liked each other. The camera doesn't blink. You cannot fake that.
Yeah. I know 2023 in September is a big deal from what I've read too. A new book sounds like maybe publishing one of your new books on the Nick Saban. Is that going to be happening September 2023? And if it is, can you maybe talk to us about the things I've read was maybe the feud between Jimbo and also some NIL stuff. Is that in the works?
Well, I did agree to that. Don't hold your breath on seeing it on time. But primarily because, guys, the story changed very quickly. When that happened, I got a call 2 days the next day, actually, from an agent I had not talked to in years. And next thing you know, I'm talking to a New York publisher, and they're throwing around, I'll try to say this modestly, significant money. And so you're enticed by a project. But on the day, but what happened? Jimbo Fisher literally fell off the face of the earth. His feud with Nick Saban became irrelevant. So I've had to go back and reassess that. And I will tell you, I did learn a lot about those 2 or 3 days, which were unlike anything we had ever seen in college football. The idea of a coach, calling out the GOAT. I mean, he flat out called Nick Saban a cheater. It was pretty cool. It was really unbelievable to watch in real time. And look at Jimbo Fisher now. He's just hired Bobby Petrino.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul, we've seen you on First Take, and sometimes with Stephen A., actually a lot of the time, it gets heated on there. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how it is, when it cuts to a commercial. Is it still heated, or maybe kind of what goes on behind the scenes on that show?
I'll try to answer this question as diplomatically as I can. Stephen and I are very close friends. There's a lot of theater that goes into that show. That doesn't mean we're not passionate, but I know, and he knows. I know him, and he knows me. What does that mean? It means that when we get out there, we have fun with it. I almost know his lines, and he knows mine. I'm not saying it's acting. It's not. But you also have to be respectful. And I'm always in awe of him, because I have never been on a show with anybody quite like him. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say Stephen A., it's cloudy outside, and he would argue for 20 minutes that the sky is blue, and he would have you convinced that it is. He's that good. I'm not that great on that, because I realize, is this stuff really that important? With Stephen A., he argues every point like it's life or death. I haven't quite gotten to that point, but we have a great time together. And it's probably one of my favorite shows because no matter where you go in the country, somebody will stop you and go, "Man, you tell Stephen A." He's there. There is no figure in sports like him right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of a transition off of football for a sec. This week, college baseball season started, and top 25, 7 out of the 10 teams are from the SEC, and then overall 9 SEC teams ranked. So is it time to say that the SEC baseball is better than SEC football?
It might be better on paper, but I don't think anything's ever going to replace football. And one thing you guys, I mean, I know how successful women's softball is out there, and I know all sports are important, but they're on almost any given Friday night or Saturday in the SEC, that they take baseball very seriously. Everybody's got a new stadium. Everybody had to. I mean, it's an arms race. I mean, you just simply couldn't let somebody else get a better stadium. And I think the ironic thing is that Mississippi State and Ole Miss won World Series back to back, and the story on Ole Miss is maybe the most unbelievable. They were on the verge of not making the tournament, and the coach was going to get fired. By the way, that's not an urban legend. That's fact. He was on the verge of getting fired, and he survives and wins the whole thing. So, in some ways, yeah, statistically it's better, but I even hear, well, what if someone? I was on a show today in Alabama. They said, "What do you think would happen if Alabama won the national championship in basketball?" I said it would be great, but it's not going to change football. You guys saw a Final Four team a couple of years ago. Did it really change anything?
No.
Yeah, mentioning Ole Miss baseball certainly hurts for us. That was a tough series for sure. I really thought we were going to win it, and that Ole Miss team. I mean, what a story, really, with that on how from the last team in to national champion.
It's but it's a tournament sport, which makes it more unpredictable, which is why people like March Madness and college baseball, and why some people get bored with college football. I don't. But it doesn't appeal to everyone, although I think it seems like almost everyone.
Yeah, and you would never have a 12 seed win the college football playoff, in my opinion. What do you think, Paul?
It's hard to imagine that happening. I mean, when you think of upsets in college football, there really are very few.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've watched a lot of double-digit teams beat Alabama, but they're usually isolated. You just don't. I mean, you don't see that just shocker. Like, how in the world did that happen? Yeah. Well, I mean, I could give you a couple of examples of how it does happen, but the odds of it happening in a game that matters, and that's the difference. It's one thing you lose your opener and you're simply unprepared. You're not paying attention because you have a bigger game the next week. It's hard to believe that would happen in a college football playoff.
Yeah, Paul. So, speaking of like college football and basketball and baseball and all the other sports, as you've been covering the SEC for a long time, do you have a favorite player or team that you've ever gotten to cover?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've done this a long time, so I was able to cover Bo Jackson at Auburn.
Yeah.
One of the, truly remarkable. I mean, I covered every game of his. I also got to cover Cam Newton for that 1 year at Auburn, which I don't know if I've ever seen a player during a singular season have that type of impact. Manziel did in a way. When Johnny was at A&M, the game against Alabama was one of the most electrifying performances I've ever seen. I mean, Tebow was standalone because of, Tebow was a lot more than just his athleticism. Tebow was a symbol. He was a symbol for young people about how to live your life. He was a symbol for athletes about how to overcome. But so, I mean, I think those are a handful. I didn't see, some of the greats of yesteryear, but I've seen enough, and I would say I did catch a little bit of Herschel Walker as well. Yeah. Herschel and Bo, I mean, they played against each other 1 year. I mean, you think about it was 82, I believe. You think about two of the greatest running backs in college football history up against each other. Now, I realize you guys have seen quite a bit as well, but those are just a couple of quick hits from the greatest hits category.
Yeah, Paul, we only have a couple more questions for you. And with the transfer portal this offseason, one thing that really stuck out to me is what Ole Miss did in the quarterback room. They brought in two really quarterbacks you would expect to start somewhere, but in the reality, only one gets to start. So who are you expecting Jackson Dart to be the starter again this year?
No, I don't think so. And I think that's really the challenge that Kiffin has and everybody has now in spring. Because if you, I mean, we see this, we used to see this all the time where coaches would drag their feet and they would, before the season, they wouldn't name a starter. You know, it'll be a game day decision. Nobody believes that. It's harder to do that now because you have to be fair. And if it's pretty obvious in spring that Jackson Dart is a third-team quarterback, then what's he going to do? I mean, he got replaced. You remember a couple of years ago, who was it? Who was the guy that?
Matt Corral.
Yeah, Matt Corral. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he took over for Plumlee, who was the starter, and Plumlee was gone pretty quickly. And I think you have to be honest with players nowadays. You just can't lead them on. And by the way, it's hard to. I mean, everybody I mean, you guys have played sports. I mean, usually you know what's going on. You don't need the coach to say, okay, this guy's the starter.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think it's Sanders or Walker Howard?
I don't really. I mean, if I've had to guess, it might be Howard just based on height, but I really, I'm not positive. I know one thing about Lane Kiffin, though. I mean, he is a smart quarterback coach. He's yet to complete the circle in terms of, you know, being a complete head coach. I mean, I thought last year was an abomination the way that season got away. I mean, they lose 5 straight. I have no doubt, though, when it comes to a quarterback, though, he will find the best one, the one that's going to win.
Yeah, this past year with Oklahoma State, you've had some kind of harsh words to say about that program. And what are your thoughts on like the mass exodus that they had in the transfer portal?
I think that's a real problem. I mean, listen, I'd be disingenuous to say I was a fan of Mike Gundy. I find some of his public behavior to be embarrassing, and you know, the whole thing a couple of years ago was ridiculous. But that's fine. I don't have to like everyone. I've been to Stillwater. I did a game day there once in the ice and frigid temperatures. They were so. I mean, I've got a good taste of Stillwater on a 27-degree freezing rain, sleet, and snow game day. You guys would love it there, I'm sure. But I think he's at a crossroads right now. He's had a number of opportunities to get out. He chose to stay, and he may have stayed in too long.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Paul, it's just been an honor to have you on. We really appreciate it, man. Just means a lot. So thank you very much. Great insight as always. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Listen, I really appreciate the invitation. I'm glad we could work it out today, and you guys holler anytime. I can't wait for you guys to get in the league.
All right. Appreciate it, Paul.